Good evening, Tel Aviv. Good afternoon, New York. You're watching the I-24 News Desk. I'm Bianca Zanini, and for the next 30 minutes, we'll bring you the top stories and analysis from around the world, live from the Jaffa port. We begin in the Middle East. Israeli Defense Forces attacked a Syrian army post in the outskirts of Quneitra this afternoon. This in response to a rocket that fell on the Israeli side of the Golan Heights earlier today, in another spillover from the internal fighting raging in Syria. There have been no injuries reported on either side. Hamas will debate when to wipe out Israel. These words from the Hamas leader in the Gaza Strip earlier today, according to local media. The controversial remarks came as reconciliation talks between Hamas and rival Palestinian faction Fatah are still ongoing. Both the U.S. and Israel have demanded that Hamas lay down its arms and recognize the state of Israel before moving forward with anything. But with these latest remarks from the Hamas leader today, that does not look like it's going to happen. Now, President Donald Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Jason Greenblatt, has weighed in on the Palestinian reconciliation efforts. Greenblatt says he hopes the Palestinian Authority will improve the humanitarian situation for Palestinians in Gaza. In a statement, he repeated the U.S. position, though, that the Palestinian Unity Government must renounce violence and recognize the State of Israel, making a pointed reference to Hamas's new role in the Palestinian government. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised Special Envoy Greenblatt.
I'm happy that Jason Greenblatt, President Trump's envoy, made it very clear that Hamas has to let down its arms, recognize Israel, and abide by previous international resolutions. They also made it clear that any Palestinian government has to abide by these resolutions. We want peace. We want a real peace, and so will not conduct relations with a terror organization in a political disguise.
Now, to the rise, fall, and future of the so-called Islamic State. 3.5 years have seen billions of dollars and dozens of nations invested in the fight, repeated attacks across the West, and a changing map of the Middle East with a whole new balance of power. From our senior Middle East correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim, inside the latest victory in Raqqa and the long road ahead.
4 months of fierce fighting on the ground, heavy bombardments from the skies, and plenty of bloodshed. The so-called Islamic State organization's de facto capital of Raqqa in Syria has fallen. The city now under the control of an Arab and Kurdish Syrian alliance, backed by a US-led military coalition.
This is not over just yet, but this is a great step. We're on the right path. We're on the right track.
But the fall of Raqqa and Mosul, the group's other de facto capital in Iraq, may be a sign of the terrorist group collapsing fortunes. In June 2014, the so-called Islamic State group proclaimed a self-described caliphate in the territories under its control in Syria and Iraq. Its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, urged Muslims worldwide to pledge allegiance and join his state. Within 1 year, IS took advantage of the chaos in both war-plagued countries, capturing huge swaths of territory with pickup trucks and relative ease. Nothing was spared, not even history. Everything was left in ruins. The extremist group's ideology and control of land attracted steady flow of foreign and regional fighters. IS ruled with an iron fist, executing many who opposed it, using torture to assert its control over territory it controlled, forcing hundreds of thousands to flee. Their brutality is widely known, following multiple executions, torture, and kidnappings broadcast on social media.
I was imprisoned here in the Daesh prisons in the National Stadium, which they called Point 11. Anyone who enters the center would never leave, and when I left, it was as if my mother gave birth to me once again.
The aim of the well-funded and heavily armed extremist group was, and still is, to establish an Islamic State according to its narrow medieval version of Islam, with its borders well beyond the Islamic world. 2 months after the caliphate was announced, an international coalition led by the US began targeting IS. After a number of deadly attacks in major European cities, The international community intensified its war against the group. Several measures and restrictions imposed on IS led to a drastic decline in its recruitment of new fighters. And in neighboring Iraq, the fight against IS involved the Iraqi forces, Peshmerga Kurdish forces, and the help of the US from above. American military advisors helped on the ground. US President Donald Trump, 9 months into his presidency, says his policy was behind the success of the military campaign against IS.
ISIS is falling fast.
The battle against IS left massive destruction behind it. And the US administration has said it's not in the business of nations building. Now the question is, who will help rebuild the lives and properties of IS's former victims? There are many other countries involved in the fight, all with their own different agendas. And the fighting in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere in the region is far from over.
We're joined now by Director for the Middle East Forum in Philadelphia, Greg Roman. Thank you, Mr. Roman. So, we know the so-called Islamic State has been losing ground. We hear of cities falling, battles won, but does this latest fall of rockets signal the beginning, perhaps, of the end of the Islamic State?
No, I think it begins the devolution of the Islamic State as a physical entity in terms of being able to govern its own territory, in terms of being able to tax individuals, influence those in town squares. And now what we see is they will devolve into a virtual caliphate, one in which they have their proxies that are in Afghanistan, Libya, the Philippines, throughout Europe, their influence on Americans. There's over 1,000 open investigations in 50 American states into ISIS-linked cases that have been opened in the last 6 months that I think will see this being the decentralization of their terror network. So they may not be strong or not even non-existent in Syria and in Iraq, but their influence will remain.
Right, so we hear that this was a great step. Now, the fight against IS has been a top priority for leaders around the world. What do you think we can expect to see in the coming months?
Well, 3 things. The first is it's time for leaders to look inward. There's the migration crisis to deal with. There is the returning fighters who have to be re-educated or sort of rehabilitated in the way in which they see the rest of the world. And to start returning those migrants who fled ISIS-round territory, they're now occupied by American and Western allied areas, not necessarily by those who are controlled by the Syrian regime, to start looking at ways to get back home. And the second is to think of a strategic move that the Western alliance in the Middle East can make, along with their Sunni Gulf Arab allies, to ensure that Iranian proxy militias and the Syrian Arab army do not fill areas that ISIS once held. This means the Kurdish areas that once inhabited by Iraqi minorities, and also in northeast Syria. And the third thing is they have to ask themselves, what do they want the territorial contiguity of Syria and Iraq to look like? Will it be the same as it was before this entire imbroglio broke out? Or will there be new territories based on ethnic or sectarian or even different nationalistic lines?
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that they are becoming a virtual caliphate. ISIS has been described as a chameleon. How do you think the world will have to change how it deals with the Islamic State going forward?
So the way in which we have to look at this is that now that their basis of operation, where they were able to have physical autonomy where they were, whether it be in Syria or in Iraq, and their ability to act in those areas, will now be transferred over to smaller cells. So they've broken the center of the network, and now they have to move like almost a game of whack-a-mole, where they have to go network by network, shutting them down in each individual country, and ensure that no other physical areas where they came from in Syria, Iraq, or Lebanon or Turkey or wherever else can be a place where they can rehabilitate their places to train fighters, to influence those overseas, and so on.
Right. Thank you so much for that analysis. Director for the Middle East Forum in Philadelphia, Greg Roman. We're taking a 1-minute break, short one, so don't go anywhere. Stay with us for more on the latest out of Florida. Hundreds of police bracing for violence as white supremacist Richard Spencer gave another controversial speech. We'll be there live. Don't miss it. 1 minute.
Perspective. What you see isn't always what we see. Every evening, Debrief takes you beyond the headlines and goes inside the news of the day from a Middle Eastern perspective. The deals, the people, the surprises. Get the inside story and how it will affect you. Debrief, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Only on I-24 News.
Middle East politics has its own set of rules. In Israel and beyond, public figures play an elaborate game of cat and mouse with the media. We'll break it all down for you with our all-star panel of movers and shakers.
The Spin Room, Sunday at 10 a.m.
Welcome back to the I-24 News Desk. We don't want your Nazi hate. Crowds of protesters holding signs and chanting on the University of Florida campus just hours ago as white supremacist Richard Spencer arrived to give one of his controversial speeches. Thousands of protesters gathered throughout the afternoon, and Florida's governor declared a state of emergency in preparation for potential violent clashes. The university says no one there invited Spencer to speak and that it was obligated by law to allow it. Spencer, as always, not holding back during his speech.
The concept of an ethno-state. Well, I could explain it in two ways. There are certainly ethno-states that exist right now. The state of Israel is an obvious one. It is a Jewish state, defined. But you could even say that a state like Poland is effectively an ethno-state, even if it's not an ethno-state in the letter of its constitution, that they understand themselves as a Polish Catholics are here, and they make up the overwhelming majority of the population. So that is one way of understanding an ethno-state. I have also described an ethno-state in a kind of headier way that calls upon Zionism, and that is an ethno-state for the future that would actually be open for all white people. So it would be open for Scotsmen, it would be open for Italians, it would be open for Russians and white Americans. So it would be something similar to Zionism. The Jewish state of Israel is not just a state for those people in the Middle East. It really is a state for all Jews around the world. And many Jews, perhaps most Jews around the world, understand it as such. So there are two ways. Again, there are ethno-states that exist right now in name or without the name. But I have talked about a kind of futuristic ideal of an ethno-state for the future that doesn't exist, but could be a goal for the future that we can think about.
We go now live to the scene with our national correspondent, Michael Shore. Michael, thanks for being with us. Tell us, what have you been seeing there? What's the atmosphere like?
Well, right now, the atmosphere just sort of heated up because Richard Spencer's speech ended. We saw one of the Nazis earlier sort of marched out. I don't know if he was a provocateur, if he was in there, someone got hit. Over my shoulder now, as the hall has emptied, you've heard the Black Lives Matter cheer. You've heard the Jewish Lives Matter cheer. You're also hearing no justice, no hate, no KKK in the USA. That's the chanting that's going on here. You're seeing a lot of people protesting Richard Spencer. Earlier today, Bianca, we got a chance to speak with just a couple of the Richard Spencer supporters, the white nationalists who were here before all of this started this morning.
Why are black people oppressed? Why are black people oppressed in America today? I don't see black people getting called the N-word everywhere they go, like it was in the 50s and the 40s earlier on. Things were bad. People were getting hurt. Nowadays, there's black people with college educations that I can't even pay for. So how is there not equal opportunity?
Like every American, Richard Spencer and his group do have the right of free speech. What I think is more important is the right, and I'd add the responsibility of everyone that opposes the messages of hate, anti-Semitism, bigotry, racism, homophobia, to speak out against this kind of message.
The right of free speech. It seems we always circle back to this. Now, Spencer helped lead white nationalists at the deadly rally in Charlottesville. Why would he want to give a speech there at the Florida University?
Well, one of the interesting parts of that, Bianca, is that public universities have to allow these speeches to occur. That's what happened here in Gainesville. Actually, Spencer applied to give the speech here, was rejected, came back with lawyers who said, no, you have to let us speak here. And in fact, they did. They don't support it. They didn't want anything to do with it. But because it's a public university, he was able to come here and speak. And that's what you're seeing today. There's been a lot of heat given to them for having to do that, to pay for it. Over $500,000 just for the security. But that's the price of free speech in America.
The price of free speech in America. Thank you, Michael Shore, our national correspondent, live with us from Florida University. Moving now to Europe, where the crisis in Spain continues. Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont threatening to declare independence once again if Spain doesn't come to the negotiating table. Madrid warning they've had enough of mixed messages and saying they will suspend the region's autonomy. While the politicians in Barcelona and Madrid dance this dangerous dance, the streets are expected to see massive protests on Saturday. Our senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman has more.
High noon in Catalonia, 2 hours before noon. At 10 a.m. local time Thursday morning, the latest deadline in the Catalonia crisis. Catalan President Carles Puigdemont sending a letter with a message to Madrid. Move against our autonomy, and we'll move forward on proclaiming our independence. The Spanish government not moved.
With the absence of a response to the precise and clear terms, the government of Spain understands that there has not been a reply to its requirements. As a result, the government will continue with procedures outlined in Article 155 of the Constitution with the objective of restoring legality in Catalonia.
Spain's cabinet will meet Saturday to decide which steps to take in applying that Article 155, the clause in the Spanish Constitution allowing the central government to take away a region's autonomy. There are a spectrum of options, all the way from dissolving the Catalan parliament to calling new regional elections to lesser steps. The government of Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy trying to get support from the opposition for whatever moves it wants to make.
Let no one doubt that the government will use all of the means at its disposal to restore as soon as possible the legal and constitutional order, to recover the peaceful coexistence between citizens, and to stop the deterioration of the political and legal insecurity.
The Spanish Senate looks set to approve the government's proposals by the end of the month. Meanwhile, in Barcelona, the Catalan independence movement wants its people out in the streets, calling for a mass demonstration on Saturday. Past protests have been huge. But the outcome here will be decided not in Madrid or Barcelona, but in Brussels, Paris, and Berlin. European leaders gathered for their quarterly summit are likely to back Madrid. If it wants to succeed, the Catalan government will somehow have to win over these hearts and minds. Owen Alterman, I-24 News.
We go now for a short break, but don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll get a glimpse of the future of artificial intelligence right here in Tel Aviv. And the advancements are jaw-dropping, as you'll see. Stay with us in just a few minutes.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. It's drama that only life can offer. High definition documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Weeknights at 10 p.m. only on I-24 News. Politics, economics, business, and technology. Get the real news and the real insight about what's happening around the world. I-24 News' Michelle McCory breaks down the top stories of the day from the Middle East to the U.S. Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. only on I-24 News.
Americans have simply lost trust in news media.
What happened to the news? All I get is a daily serving of lies.
Do your job and just tell me the news.
I am overloaded with news that is useless.
Give me the facts. Let me sort it. Where's the integrity?
Why is the news so biased? I will never trust the media.
I-24 News' daily and breaking news show, The Rundown, where all your need-to-know stories, insight, and happenings from the Middle East and around the world come to you in the next hour. And watch as we see beyond and bring the world closer to you. The Rundown, Monday to Friday at 1 p.m., only on I-24 News.
Step inside a world of high-tech and intrigue, starting from the heart of the Middle East to wherever news is happening. We'll show the untold stories of security, intelligence, and strategic affairs, along with in-depth analysis of global conflicts, military technology, and cybersecurity. All this and more on Strictly Security. Join us on Saturdays, only on I-24 News.
Strictly Security, Saturday at 8 p.m. Every stone, every street, every scar tells the story of Israel. A place that speaks to the souls of Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Changed by time and conflict, its magic still echoes in the hearts of its people. Watch Holy Land Uncovered every Sunday at 11 a.m., only on I-24 News.
And welcome back. I'm Bianca Zanini, and you're watching the I-24 News Desk. The future is here, on display right here in Tel Aviv, a glimpse at what's to come. We're talking virtual reality for the masses, next-level facial recognition, drones on police cars, and other cars that drive you. Our economy correspondent Rebecca Grieg spent a day looking at some of the latest in artificial intelligence, poised to change our lives.
Artificial intelligence may look like the future. It may even sound like the future. But it's now here in Israel at the GPU Technology Conference hosted by US gaming company NVIDIA.
Artificial intelligence is going to usher in a new era of robotics, where the robots can be programmed to do tasks that may be modified or changed over time. They won't be just fixed function. It'll be the ability to have a robot actually support you, to cook your food, to maintain your health care. Cars are actually just driving robots.
Dror Miri knows a thing or two about driving robots. The vice president of business development at Israeli tech company Ada Sky works to make cars safe in low visibility and extreme weather conditions. Sensors like these will soon come as standard in family cars and eventually in self-driving vehicles.
In the future, when there will be self-driving cars and fully autonomous cars, the user will not know which sensors are running and what's going on. The user will just have a good time inside the cabin.
Luke Wignall also works with cars, virtual cars.
What if I wanted to put that car in the countryside, or I wanted to put that car in a city? If I had to fly that car around the world, that'd be really hard.
Virtual reality allows researchers, separated by seas and continents, to work collaboratively in the same virtual space.
In virtual reality, I can put it anywhere, and I can do it instantly, right? And I can change the paint color. I can do whatever I need to do to put that object, my work, in a situation where I can be the most creative, the most productive.
And it's not only high-end technology that the conference is showcasing.
We're enabling artificial intelligence on very cheap devices, such as the phone you have in your pocket right now. What we allow is very, very accurate face detection that you can run very cheaply on your device without draining the battery.
In 5 years' time, the artificial intelligence market will be worth $16 billion. iRobot is closer than you think.
From amazing robots still to come to a very harsh and tangible reality. It's been called the largest displacement of people since World War II, with tens of millions fleeing war and persecution and traveling hundreds of thousands of miles in search of safety. In his new documentary, world-famous artist Ai Weiwei tries to capture the magnitude of the global refugee crisis. Culture correspondent Maya Margit has more.
War, starvation, and poverty. Millions of people around the globe are risking death over land and water to find a better life. This is what Chinese artist Ai Weiwei explores in his new documentary film, Human Flow.
Being a refugee is much more than a political status. It is the most pervasive kind of cruelty that can be exercised against a human being.
Human always moves, and from one place to another, and those changing location and move made our civilization become much more intelligent, much more tolerant, with great understanding of humanity.
Human Flow was filmed in 23 locations around the world, from the Middle East to Europe to Africa and even North America. 200 crew members took part in the epic and much anticipated film. The story of mass human migration is one that I can relate to. Born in Beijing, the artist was displaced as a child during China's Cultural Revolution.
My personal history very much relate to the current situation. My father was exiled the year I was born, and he spent 20 years in this exile camps in a very remote area. I grew up in that kind of condition. That helps me to be identified with the people I'm filming.
Ai is famous for his massive art installations, which often include social and political messages. Like Good Fences Make Good Neighbors, a series of huge sculptures set up around New York just last week. The exhibit also comments on the global migrant crisis. Human Flow is now playing in cinemas across the United States. Maya Margit, I-24 News.
That the world is shrinking, and people from different religions, different cultures are going to have to learn to live with each other.
Those were the top stories for this hour here at I-24 News. If you want more, join us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Thank you for watching, and good night from the Jeff Report.